What does it mean to be Jewish? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm asking because your answer, or more accurately, the fact that most people don't have a clear answer, is the entire engine behind one of the oldest and most effective traps in human history. Being Jewish is simultaneously a religion, an ethnicity, a cultural identity, and a national heritage. A secular Jew in Brooklyn who hasn't walked into a synagogue in 20 years is Jewish. A Hasidic family in Jerusalem keeping every commandment of the Torah is Jewish. An atheist professor at Columbia who identifies culturally but rejects every metaphysical claim, also Jewish. These aren't edge cases, they're the mainstream. And this complexity, this layered, multidimensional identity, is what makes the trap work. Because when you can't clearly define who a people are, it becomes disturbingly easy to redefine what hating them looks like. You're listening to TrapThink. I'm Darren, and today we're walking into one of the most complicated conversations happening right now. One that most people are getting wrong, and not by accident. Let's build a foundation, because this conversation gets derailed by undefined terms more than almost any other, and that's by design. So let's slow down and actually define some things. First, what is a Jew? Jewishness is one of the rare identities that operates on multiple planes at once. It's a group of people, an ethnicity with shared ancestry tracing back thousands of years. It's a religion, Judaism, with its own theology, law, and practice. And it's a cultural identity that persists even when someone abandons the religious component entirely. This isn't a modern invention. This has been the case since the exile from Babylon. And here's why this matters, because Jewish people exist across the entire political and ideological spectrum, and they don't agree with each other about much of anything, except that they are, in fact, Jewish. You have secular progressive Jews who march in protest against Israeli military operations. You have Orthodox Jews who believe the modern state of Israel is a premature human project that should have waited for the Messiah. You have Zionist Jews, anti-Zionist Jews, and Jews who honestly couldn't give a rat's ass about any of this. They're all Jewish. A February 2026 survey by the Jewish Federations of North America found that while a strong majority of American Jews support Israel's existence as a Jewish and democratic state, most Jews, especially younger Jews, do not identify as Zionists. Let that sit for a second. The majority of young American Jews support Israel's right to exist, but reject the label Zionist, which means the word Zionist and the concept of supporting Israel's existence has already separated in the minds of people it most directly describes. Now hold on to that, because we're going to need it. It's complex. Okay, what is Israel? This is where it starts to get tangled, because the word Israel means at least three different things, depending on who's using it. First, there's the biblical Israel, the covenant people of God, descended from Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. Jacob, whose name God changed to Israel. This is a spiritual and ethnic designation that predates any modern nation-state by millennia. Second, there's the modern state of Israel, established in 1948, a political entity with borders, a military, a parliament, foreign policy, and all the messy realities of any nation. And third, and this is the one that most people miss, there's the prophetic Israel, the Israel that appears in Revelation, in Ezekiel, and in Daniel. The Israel that God makes specific promises about and specific warnings to, and whether that prophetic Israel maps perfectly onto the physical nation with the blue and white flag, that's a genuine theological question with serious people on multiple sides of it. We're going to come back to that, but for now, understand, these three things are related but not identical, and collapsing them into one concept is one of the primary ways this trap operates. What is Zionism? At its historical core, Zionism is the belief that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's it. That's the original idea. Theodor Herzl formalized it in the late 1800s in response to European antisemitism, particularly the Dreyfus Affair in France, where a Jewish military officer was framed for treason, and it became clear that assimilation alone would never protect Jewish people from hatred. Now, Zionism in practice has evolved. There is political Zionism, religious Zionism, cultural Zionism, and what some scholars call revisionist Zionism. There are versions that emphasize peaceful coexistence and versions that prioritize territorial expansion. They're not the same. But in public discourse, all of that nuance gets collapsed into a single word that people either defend absolutely or condemn absolutely. And that collapse is useful, not to you, not to me, and frankly, not to most Jewish people. It's useful to the system that benefits from your confusion. A Canadian political scientist named David Hassan surveyed American Jews in 2022. When he defined Zionism as a feeling of attachment to Israel, 70% identified as Zionist. When he defined it as a belief in a Jewish and democratic state, 72%. But when he defined Zionism differently, using a definition more aligned with how critics use the word, the numbers collapsed. Same people, different definition, wildly different result. That's how unstable the word is, and that instability, that's a weapon. Now, I come at this from a Christian worldview. I've said that from the beginning of this show, and I'm not going to hide it now, especially when the Bible speaks directly to this. The book of Revelation, chapter 20, the broader apocalyptic passages, describes a time when Israel is surrounded, besieged on all sides. This is echoed in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the prophecy of Gog and Magog, where a coalition of nations comes against Israel. Zechariah 12 says that in the last days, Jerusalem will become a heavy stone for all peoples, and all who try to lift it will be cut to pieces. Zechariah 14 describes all nations gathering against Jerusalem. Now, here's the honest interpretive question. What does Israel mean in these passages? Well, if you're a dispensationalist, and a lot of American evangelicals are, whether they know the term or not, you read this as a literal prophecy about the physical nation state. Armies, borders, tanks, and under that reading, the current situation where Israel is increasingly isolated diplomatically, condemned by international bodies, and facing hostility from multiple directions, it looks like stage setting for fulfillment. Prophecy. But there's another reading, and it's not a liberal reading, it's an ancient one. Many theologians, including those in the Reformed and Covenant traditions, read Israel in Revelation as the covenant people of God, which, after Christ, includes the church, like Christians. Under this reading, the surrounding isn't about a geographic siege. It's about the increasing hostility towards God's people, all of them, worldwide. That would mean Judeo-Christianity, not just Christians or Jews. And if you take that second reading seriously, then the global rise of antisemitism isn't just a political trend, it's a spiritual one. The hatred of the Jewish people becomes a marker, an indicator of something deeper moving beneath the surface. Now, I'm not here to tell you which interpretation is correct. Both are held by serious, faithful scholars who take Scripture very seriously. What I want you to see is this. Under their reading, anti-Semitism isn't just wrong, it's significant. It's not a random hatred, it's a pattern. And the Bible has been warning about it for a very long time. This is where things get really interesting for American Christians, because the theological debate about Israel, like what it means, who it applies to, and what our obligations are, is playing out in real time on some of the biggest platforms in conservative media, and it's messy. Tucker Carlson recently sat down with U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee in Israel for a nearly 3-hour interview, and what happened in that conversation is one of the most revealing exchanges I've seen in conservative media in years.
Israel is a land that God gave through Abraham to a people that he chose. It was a people, a place, and a purpose. We can look at it that way. Christian Zionism, I want to go back because that's where we started.
I'm not going to let you off on this because you have said it 3 times that God gave this land to this people. And so it is entirely fair for me with respect to ask, what land are you talking about? Because I just read Genesis 15, as I have many times. Mm-hmm. And that land, I think it says, from the Nile to the Euphrates, which is, once again, basically the entire Middle East. So God gave that land to his people, the Jews, or he didn't. You're saying he did. What does that mean? Does Israel have the right to that land? Because you're appealing to Genesis.
Yeah.
You're saying that's the original deed.
It would be fine if they took it all.
Now, that viral clip ends there, and most people ran with it. But the full answer has a lot more nuance. Huckabee walks it back as an irrelevant hypothetical. But the damage is done, because what Carlson exposed is that the theological underpinning of American Christian Zionism, the belief system that drives billions of dollars in U.S. policy, is shockingly thin when pressed. Huckabee is an ordained minister and the sitting U.S. ambassador to Israel. He couldn't clearly articulate how a Genesis passage about Abraham's descendants should translate into modern geopolitical policy. And Carlson, who just played dumb the entire time like he always does, he let the gaps speak for themselves. And then Carlson pushed further. He brought up Palestinian Christians, people who worship the same Jesus, read the same Bible, and have been living in the same land for 2,000 years. He asked why the U.S. isn't doing more to protect them. He asked about the more than 200 journalists killed in Gaza. Huckabee's answers were defensive and at times just flippant.
What are those 7 fronts?
Well, you got Lebanon. You have Egypt. Now, Egypt is not an active war, but you have the Muslim Brotherhood within Egypt. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. You've got Syria.
Wait, they're fighting a war with Jordan?
With the Muslim Brotherhood that is in Jordan, not directly with Jordan, not the government of Jordan.
But are they...
You've got Hezbollah. You've got
in Lebanon,
Houthis.
In Yemen.
You have Hamas in Gaza. You have the threats that come from Iran. And how many is that?
That's 7.
That's 7, okay. I'd give you an 8th one. You know the 8th one? The media. No, I would tell you there's an 8th front war. They fight.
How many journalists has Israel killed in Gaza?
I don't know.
Over 200. It seems like
now, are they real journalists? Because a lot of those people that were supposedly journalists were actually Hamas fighters that are documented Hamas fighters. So that's why I ask you, how many are actual journalists?
You know, I don't know, but a lot of them were. I mean, they worked for big news organizations and they had press written on their chests.
Yeah, some of them had UNRWA cars and they were also working for Hamas.
Now here's where I need to be honest with you, because this is where the trap lives even inside the people trying to expose the traps. Carlson is doing something genuinely important in questioning the theological and policy foundations of Christian Zionism. Those are legitimate questions. A growing number of evangelical scholars and younger Christians are asking the same things. A Palestinian-American pastor appeared on Carlson's show and said something worth hearing. He invited American Christians to listen directly to Palestinian Christian voices, to visit the region, to stand in solidarity with the living body of Christ in the Holy Land. That's a pastoral call, a serious one. But, and this is a critical but, Carlson doesn't stop at questioning Christian Zionism. He goes further. He suggested DNA testing Israeli citizens to determine whether they are really descended from Abraham. He called Netanyahu completely evil and completely destructive. He said he believes Israel is going to blow up the Alaska Mosque to build a third temple. And he did all this after hosting Nick Fuentes, an avowed white nationalist and Holocaust denier, for a friendly 2-hour conversation in October 2025.
What did you see as like the most important gatekeepers that needed to be overturned, pushed aside in order to do this?
It was the Zionist Jews, like Dave Rubin, like Ben Shapiro, like Dennis Prager. It was these the guys that were really controlling the media apparatus that seemed to me to be the biggest impediment.
Fox is not a Jewish business, though.
Well, Rupert Murdoch is an ally of Netanyahu, so he's aligned.
Yeah.
And he owns the whole News Corp empire, so, and yeah, he's certainly a part of it also.
I mean, Dave Rubin, though, does he matter?
No, not really.
Right. I mean, Dave Rubin is like, I don't know, do people watch Dave Rubin?
They did back then, I mean, because you got to consider they were kind of like the ascendant new media, you know? They represented the next big thing.
And that's it. That's the laundering in action right there, in real time, on a show with 17 million followers. Carlson claims he's not interested in the Jews. He even put air quotes around it during the Fuentes interview. He says it's a foreign policy question, but then he platforms a man who opens his show with animated depictions of Jewish conspiracies, who has praised Hitler, who partied to Heil Hitler in a Miami nightclub in January of this year. And he also said on Rumble that Jews are running society and that the solution is that white men need to run everything. And Carlson's defense is essentially, he's popular, I can't ignore him. That's not journalism, that's laundering. You take the raw hatred, the uncut version that nobody in polite society would touch, and you run it through a legitimate-sounding conversation on a major platform until it comes out the other side looking like just asking questions. And by the time it reaches your feed, the edges have been smoothed. The swastikas are gone. The Heil Hitler chants are gone. What's left is it wrong to question our relationship with Israel? Well, no, of course it's not. But that's not all that's happening, and you need to be able to see both things at once. One more thing, and it's kind of important to Americans. The United States is not directly referenced in biblical prophecy. People have tried to map it onto various passages, like the eagle's wings in Daniel 7, the unnamed merchant nation in Ezekiel 38, various symbolic readings of Revelation, but nothing is explicit. America is conspicuously absent from the end times narrative as most scholars read it, which means our role, America's role, in relation to Israel is genuinely open. It's not commanded, it's not prohibited, it's a choice. And like all choices, it carries weight. But what is not ambiguous in any reading, in any tradition, in any serious interpretation of Scripture, is that the hatred of Jewish people is condemned. Full stop. Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. That's God speaking to Abraham. And whatever you do with geopolitics, that verse doesn't have a footnote. All right, here's where trapthink lives. Here's the trap. Anti-Semitism in its raw form is socially unacceptable. Has been since the Holocaust made the full horror of it undeniable. Nobody with any public platform can say, I hate Jews, and survive the next news cycle. That kind of blatant hatred has been pushed underground. But hatred doesn't disappear when you push it underground. It finds new clothes. And the new clothes look like this. Legitimate political criticism of the Israeli government gets used as a vehicle and laundering mechanism to normalize hostility towards Jewish people as a whole. Not always intentionally. Sometimes the person saying it doesn't even realize what they're participating in. That's what makes it a trap. Let me show you how it works step by step. All right, step 1. Start with something defensible. Criticize an Israeli military operation. Question a settlement policy. Challenge the humanitarian record in Gaza. These are legitimate things to discuss. Reasonable people disagree about Israeli policy, and Israeli citizens themselves disagree about it constantly. This is normal political discourse. Step 2. Shift the language from policy to identity. Watch how quickly the Israeli government becomes Zionists. And then watch how quickly Zionists becomes a word that gets applied not just to Israeli officials, but to any Jew who believes Israel has a right to exist. A synagogue in Olney, Maryland got vandalized in February with a graffiti Azab, all Zionists are bastards, right next to a swastika. Those two symbols appearing together tells you exactly where this leads. And it's not just in America. In February alone, a 13-year-old French boy was attacked at knife point walking to a synagogue in Paris. A package containing anti-Semitic death threats and a bullet cartridge was sent to a Jewish community center in Munich. A Montreal restaurant was vandalized with anti-Semitic slurs. A top private school in Johannesburg refused to play tennis against the Jewish school because they were Jewish. The school's staff admitted they were facing pressure from their parent body not to compete against Jewish students. In Stockholm, police moved a weekly anti-Israel rally to a Holocaust memorial monument next to the main synagogue. This isn't theoretical. This is from February of this year, 1 month, worldwide, not that long ago.
Time in Montgomery County now, police say a Jewish synagogue has been vandalized. They say signs outside that synagogue in Olney were painted with anti-Semitic phrases and symbols overnight, Monday and Tuesday. The synagogue's executive director says he's grateful this only involves signs, but Jerry Kiwi telling us it's still not right.
Obviously, it's horrible. You'd like to think that people will respect your property and, a synagogue's right to be what it is. It's not appropriate.
$1,000 reward is now being offered for information leading to an arrest.
Step 3. Make Jewish people prove their innocence. This is the stage we're at right now. Jewish students on college campuses are being asked to publicly denounce Zionism as a condition of social acceptance. Not asked to comment on a specific policy, asked to renounce a component of their identity. Hillel International recorded over 2,300 anti-Semitic incidents on campuses during the 2024-2025 academic year, the highest since tracking began. As of February, over 1,000 more had already been logged for the current year. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights just held a full-day briefing on it. The Justice Department filed suit against UCLA. Families across California are suing the state because their children are being bullied and assaulted in K-12 schools, and the formal complaints are sitting in a backlog.
I was actually in college on October 7th, 2023, which is now enshrined as the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. While Israel was still counting its dead and searching for its hostages, my own peers were organizing demonstrations that rationalized the attack. Within hours, I, along with Jewish students across this country, became targets, not because of anything we had said or done, but because we are Jewish. To be clear, we are not here today to litigate a foreign policy issue. This is not a discussion about free speech. It's about conduct. We are here because the civil rights of Jewish students in the United States are not being upheld. To give you one of many examples, I was physically chased across Tulane's campus by a student screaming, "Fuck you, Jew." Please take a moment to imagine that. I can assure you that student did not ask me my position on Middle East policy before deciding that I was worth being chased down. I did not attend the rest of my classes that day, my study group, or social events. I sat and wrote a detailed report to Tulane's official discrimination reporting forum, hoping that the student who attacked me would face consequences. Instead, the Student Conduct Office labeled "Fuck you, Jew" as political speech and offered me mental health resources.
Think about what's happening here. Imagine asking any other ethnic or religious group to publicly disavow an element of their heritage as the price for social inclusion. Imagine telling a Muslim student they need to publicly condemn Islamism, not a specific policy, the entire spectrum of political Islam, before they're welcome at a study group. Imagine telling a black student they need to disavow the concept of Pan-Africanism before they're allowed at the table. It would be immediately and universally recognized as bigotry. But with Jewish students, it's framed as a political litmus test, and that framing is the entire trick. An honest reporting piece from February 2026 puts it in terms I think are worth repeating. They analyzed a $15 million Super Bowl ad about anti-Semitism funded by Robert Kraft's Blue Square Alliance, and the reaction from the Jewish community was overwhelmingly that it missed the mark. Because the ad depicted anti-Semitism as it looked in 1996. Slurs, physical bullying, a Jewish kid being called dirty. But modern anti-Semitism doesn't call you a slur. It pressures you to prove that you're the right kind of Jew, the kind who has sufficiently distanced yourself from Israel, from Zionism, from parts of the Jewish identity that make other people uncomfortable. And if you don't pass that test, you're not excluded because you're Jewish, you're excluded because you're a Zionist. Same result, cleaner packaging.
Good afternoon all. Thought I'd leave just this voice note because it's not going to be easy for me to type. It'll take too long. Been teaching now for 36 years, and today I've probably witnessed the most disgusting act in my teaching career. Our King David first team tennis girls were scheduled to play Rodin this afternoon at Rodin, and Rodin have refused to play us based on the fact that the kids that they're going to be walking onto their courts are Jewish. I've never seen a level of anti-Semitism actually go down to that particular point in schools. And there's a school like Rodin who actually will refuse to play another school based on that school's religion. I think it's absolutely disgusting and absolutely disgraceful.
That's the laundering. That's the mechanism. And it's happening at scale. You take something old, the hatred of Jewish people, and then you run it through the machine of legitimate political discourse until it comes out the other side looking like principled opposition to a political ideology. Until a South African school refuses to play another school in tennis because that school is Jewish. The effect on actual Jewish human beings here is identical. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've noticed I've just spent a significant amount of time talking about things that happen on the left. Campus protests, progressive activism, the academic framing of anti-Zionism. And if I stopped there, this would be a Fox News segment. But TrapThink doesn't stop there, because the laundering mechanism works on the right too, and right now, in 2026, it might be working even more effectively. Let me lay out what's happening in conservative media over the last 12 months, because the timeline matters. In October 2025, Tucker Carlson, who has over 17 million followers, spoke on the main stage at the 2024 Republican National Convention, hosted Nick Fuentes for a friendly 2-hour interview. Fuentes is a self-described white identitarian and counter-Zionist who has praised Hitler, questioned the Holocaust, said that Jewish people have no place in Western civilization, and in March of 2025 stated on Rumble, and I want to be precise here, that Jews are running society, women need to shut up, blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part, and we would live in paradise. That is not a paraphrase, that is what he said. In January of this year, Fuentes was filmed partying to Heil Hitler chants at a Miami nightclub alongside other far-right figures. The mayor of Miami Beach apologized and banned Fuentes from the venue. And Carlson's response to hosting this person was, everyone's going to say I'm a Nazi, but Fuentes isn't going away. Ben Shapiro tried to strangle him in the crib, and now he's bigger than ever.
So now having done it, what do you think of him?
About Fuentes?
Yeah.
I think it's so funny. I did not make Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is he's just enormously gifted as a broadcaster. I mean, it's unbelievable. His talent is. I mean, I have done that job, not the Holocaust jokes, obviously, but I mean, I've sat in front of a camera and talked. He's really good at it. He has not been canceled. He can't be canceled. So I kind of think of Fuentes in terms of like, what place does he occupy in? What does he say about our society? And I'm not making excuses for anybody else's views. I'm just saying as a factual matter, if this is the most popular person among young men, young white men, then we need to like start thinking about why that is. And we need to reflect on what we have collectively done to young men, which is destroy them, actually. And no one wants to say that because no one wants to take any responsibility at all for anything ever. No one ever wants to repent. They all want to cast stones. They don't see the plank in their own eye. This is including me. It's just humans are like this. And they want to be like, Nazi. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, great. But, like, how did this happen?
Why are they listening to him?
Kind of.
The Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, then defended Carlson. Heritage, the think tank behind Project 2025, an organization that has historically been a major supporter of Israel, put out a statement saying that attacking Carlson was a distraction from the real enemy and that the globalist class was sowing division.
Christians can critique the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. And of course, anti-Semitism should be condemned. The Heritage Foundation didn't become the intellectual backbone of the conservative movement by canceling our own people or policing the consciences of Christians. And we won't start doing that now. We will always defend truth. We will always defend America, and we will always defend our friends against the slander of bad actors who serve someone else's agenda. That includes Tucker Carlson, who remains, and as I have said before, always will be a close friend of the Heritage Foundation.
Several members of Heritage's own anti-Semitism task force resigned in response. Roberts later apologized and specifically condemned Fuentes, but the damage was done because the message had already gone out. Anti-Semitism in the ranks is a manageable PR problem, not a moral line. And then there's Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro's former Daily Wire colleague. 5.7 million YouTube subscribers. A Jewish People Policy Institute study analyzed about 3,000 of her videos and found that by the second half of 2025, 75% of her videos mentioning Jews were classified as anti-Semitic. She's called Israel an occult nation. She's accused Jews of orchestrating the transatlantic slave trade. She urged her audience to read notorious 19th century anti-Semitic texts. She called Ben Shapiro part of the Synagogue of Satan, which, for anyone who doesn't know their church history, is an anti-Semitic slur drawn from medieval Christian folklore where Jews were depicted with the devil's horns and demonic features.
These characters are just being inserted into places to serve Israel. That makes Israel the master of the universe. And that's troubling, because this is a state that has a hexagram on their flag, okay? They're even lying about the history of the Star of David. It's a hexagram. It's a cult. You can't just wipe that away. It's not even a long time ago. There's tons of books. It's showing you that that's a hexagram. What do you pretend? It's a cultic. Yeah, you're just another array trying to wipe it. You're like, nope, that's not. That is a religious. No, it's a hexagram. Okay, we're not stupid. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. I could rant about the lies that nation has told. I mean, not even that. The Star of David used to be the flag of Morocco. Okay, why? That's weird. It's not a Jewish state. Why? What was going on in Morocco? What was going on in Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco? Yes, it is an occult nation. There's no question about that. Everything that they are involved in is a cult. And that's why we have to sort of wake the world up to this very quickly, because they have a lot of power. And the only way that we are going to be able to fight this is by being willing to tell the truth.
And Nick Fuentes, the guy who chants Heil Hitler at parties, praised Owens for her vitriolic anti-Semitism. When the guy whose entire brand is literal Nazi admiration says you're doing good work, maybe take a step back and examine why. Now here's why this matters for TrapThink, because this isn't a fringe phenomenon anymore. It's happening inside the Republican coalition. Trump himself told a reporter in March 2026 that Carlson has lost his way and isn't MAGA. But Trump also dined with Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago in 2022 and claimed he didn't know who he was. The party is trying to have it both ways. Distance from explicit anti-Semitism, but keep the audience that's attracted to it. And here's the bipartisan punchline. On the left, you have campus activists chanting Zionists off our campus. On the right, you have Carlson saying that the war in Iran happened because Israel wanted it to happen, and Fuentes calling organized Jewry a transitional gang. Different language, different costumes, same destination. The horseshoe is bending until the tips are touching. Marjorie Taylor Greene, a recently retired Republican congresswoman, has become increasingly hostile towards American aid for Israel. On the progressive side, you have figures like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who have long been critics. And in what might be the most disorienting political image of 2026, the populist wing of MAGA has joined forces with progressive Democrats to sponsor legislation blocking war authorization for Iran. Tucker Carlson and Rashid Tlaib are functionally on the same team. The algorithm doesn't know what to do with that. There's no outrage template for bipartisan agreement. It doesn't generate clicks, so it gets ignored. But here's what doesn't get ignored: the anti-Semitism that travels alongside both movements. Because the criticism of Israel that comes from the progressive left and the criticism that comes from the populist right share a feature in common. Both, at their fringes, collapse into hostility towards Jewish people. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. And that's enough for the trap to work. I want to step back from the media landscape for a moment and just talk about what's happening to actual human beings. Because it's easy to get lost in the discourse, the definitions, the influencer feuds, the campus politics, and forget that there are real people on the other end of this. The Anti-Defamation League reported that anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. hit 8,873 in 2023. That's a 140% increase from the prior year and the highest since tracking began in 1979. A 200% increase from October 2023 through late 2024. Assaults are up 45%. Vandalism is up 69%. Harassment is up 184%. FBI data says anti-Semitic incidents accounted for 68% of all religion-based hate crimes in 2023. But the numbers are abstractions. Let me make it real. 55% of Jewish Americans surveyed by the ADL in 2025 said that they experienced at least one anti-Semitic incident in the last 12 months. More than 1 in 3 said they witnessed actual or threatened anti-Semitic violence. And among those who experienced it in a workplace or school setting, over half didn't report it. Why? Well, 43% said they didn't think anything would happen. 21% said they didn't trust any organization to handle it well. Think about that. The majority of people experiencing this hate are absorbing it in silence because reporting it feels pointless. That's not a failure of Jewish resilience. That's a failure of every institution that's supposed to protect them.
After October 7th, I expected that there would be an uproar, there would be a flourishing of concern related to anti-Semitism, and I was stunned. Just the opposite occurred. In fact, there was more anti-Semitism. At least it appeared that way to me on casual observation. And the casual observation included my alma mater, Cornell, where I was stunned to see, by the way, which has a significant Jewish population, I was stunned to see harassment, violence, threats, and I think what really struck me was there was one professor who was on the art squad who said he was exhilarated by what happened. And I thought that form of evil needs to be addressed immediately.
And while the discourse focuses on college campuses, it's reaching younger. In California, the Brandeis Center and Stand With Us sued the state, not a school district, the whole state, alleging that K-12 students are being harassed, bullied, and in at least 2 cases physically assaulted simply because they're Jewish. And the formal complaints filed with districts in the Department of Education are sitting in backlogs, months past their statutory deadlines. One lawsuit asked the court to appoint anti-Semitism experts to reveal the ethnic studies curriculum that some parents believe are actually contributing to the problem. Meanwhile, anti-Semitism has become a major issue in the 2026 California governor's race. 5 leading candidates appeared at a forum in Los Angeles and competed to present themselves as the strongest defenders of Jewish safety. That's remarkable. In a state where housing costs, wildfires, and water shortages usually dominate campaigns, anti-Semitism is a defining issue. What does it tell you about the scale of the problem when protecting Jewish people becomes a competitive campaign position? The U.S. State Department's envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Rabbi Yehuda Kaplan, told an international conference in February 2026, the world is witnessing levels of anti-Semitism not seen since 1933. Since 1933. He said that out loud at an official U.S. government event.
So as I think all of my colleagues have said, you don't have to agree with the government of Israel to be able to say strongly and clearly that Israel has a right to exist, to defend itself, to be proud of its history, of its culture, of its people. There's another form of misassociation, though, that I want to point out, which is how wrong it is that Jewish children, including right here in our own state, on our own public university campuses, are harassed and discriminated against for being Jewish because of some association with the government halfway around the world that they may strongly disagree with. Why is that? There is something about anti-Semitism in our society that is so deep, so wrong. You don't see, at least I'm not aware of as mayor, people being mad at Narendra Modi and then picking on Indian children. There's something very pervasive here, which is why we have to have that anti-Semitism prevention coordinator, laws like AB 715, and specific focus on the nature of anti-Semitism in our society and combat it very vocally, very directly.
Okay, so where does Zionism fit in all this? Because I've deliberately avoided giving you a clean verdict on Zionism, and some of you are probably frustrated by that. Well, let me tell you why. The confusion around Zionism is the fog that the trap operates in, and I'm not going to add to that fog by giving you a bumper sticker take. Here's what's actually happening in the discourse right now. There are essentially 3 camps. Camp 1 says anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. The ADL and most major Jewish organizations hold this position. Their argument, since Zionism at its core is Jewish self-determination, denying that right is inherently discriminatory. The U.S. House passed a resolution stating this. The IHRA definition adopted by 46 countries and over 1,200 institutions includes certain forms of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitic. Camp 2 says that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are categorically distinct. Some academics and groups argue Zionism is a political ideology like any other and should be open to critique without being labeled hatred. They point out that some of the most vocal anti-Zionists are in fact Jewish, and that conflating the two silences legitimate dissent. A Canadian political scientist wrote recently that calling anti-Zionism anti-Semitism essentially drains the word anti-Semitism of any useful meaning, because it treats everything from mild policy criticism to denial of Israel's right to exist as the same offense. And Camp 3 says that they're distinct in theory, but inseparable in practice. Former U.S. envoy Deborah Lipstadt said that while they're not identical, anti-Zionism almost inevitably devolves into anti-Semitism. A Jewish Journal analysis from January 2026 made the same argument, that anti-Zionism as a movement routinely collapses into anti-Semitism, even if the two are conceptually different. And there's a practical test for this. Natan Sharansky's 3D test: demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. If your criticism of Israel does any of those 3 things, you've crossed the line. If it doesn't, you haven't. Now, what do I think? I think that confusion is the point. I think the inability to settle this question is not a failure of the discourse. It's a feature. Because as long as everyone is arguing about whether anti-Zionism is or isn't anti-Semitism, nobody is watching what's actually happening to Jewish people. The fog of Zionism isn't just obscuring a political question, it's providing cover for real hatred to advance while everyone argues about vocabulary. Okay, that's been a lot. So let's take a breath. Let's sit with the absurdity of all of this that I've just described. Tucker Carlson, a man who made his career defending traditional American values on Fox News, is now sitting in Israel grilling the U.S. ambassador about DNA tests for Jewish people, and then flying to Saudi Arabia to repeat the talking points on state-owned media. Saudi Arabia, the country that killed a journalist with a bone saw, and Tucker's like, yeah, these guys get it. He didn't mention Khashoggi once, not once. Meanwhile, Nick Fuentes, who has literally chanted Heil Hitler at a club, is growing his following among young conservatives, and the Heritage Foundation's first instinct was defend the guy who platformed him. Kevin Roberts' defense was essentially, I didn't know much about this Fuentes guy. Sir, Google is free. Wikipedia is free. The man has a Canary mission page longer than a CVS receipt. Candace Owens is telling her audience to read a 19th century anti-Semitic pamphlet like it's a summer book club pick. This month's selection, Casual Bigotry from 1882. Pair with a nice rosé. And on the left, we've got college protesters chanting, "We are Hamas," in front of Jewish students wearing Stars of David, and then releasing press statements that say, "Our movement rejects anti-Semitism." Brother, you just endorsed a terrorist organization to the face of a Jewish student. That's like punching someone and then saying, "I reject violence." The press release doesn't undo the chant. The chant lives on TikTok forever. The Super Bowl, America's holiest secular holiday, ran a $15 million ad about anti-Semitism. And the Jewish community's reaction was basically, thanks for the effort. You depicted anti-Semitism like it's a 1990s after-school special. The ad showed a kid getting called Dirty Jew in a high school hallway, and Jewish people were like, that's not how it works anymore. Now they just ask you to condemn Zionism at dinner, and if you don't, you're uninvited from the group project. $15 million to make a commercial that's already 20 years out of date. That's the most expensive misread since the Titanic crew said, "What iceberg?" We're living in a time when the far right and the far left agree on hating the same people, and neither side can see the irony. The horseshoe isn't bending, it's a full circle now. It's an anti-Semitic Ouroboros, a hate snake eating its own tail. So I like to give 5 things to do in my podcast, so let's do it here too. How do we escape this one? Well, 1, learn to hold complexity. Jewish identity is complex. Israeli politics are complex. Zionism is complex. If someone is offering you a simple narrative on any of these, whether it's Israel's always right or Zionism is racism, they're either uninformed or they're selling you something. The world wants to give you a binary, pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, Zionist or anti-Zionist. And you don't have to accept that framing. You can reject the binary without rejecting the people on either side of it. 2, separate the government from the people. You can believe the Israeli government has made serious policy errors, and many Israelis believe exactly that, and still believe that Jewish people deserve safety, dignity, and self-determination. These are not contradictory positions. They're what maturity looks like. We do this with every other nation on earth. We criticize American foreign policy without being called anti-American in any meaningful sense, so apply the same standard. 3, watch your language, not for political correctness, but for precision. When you say Zionist, do you mean the Israeli government? Do you mean any Jew who thinks Israel should exist? Do you mean something else entirely? If you can't define it, then don't use it, because vague language in charged conversations doesn't just create confusion, it creates casualties. 4, watch who's doing the educating. If your understanding of the Jewish people, Israel, or Zionism is coming primarily from Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Nick Fuentes, or campus protest chants, you're being educated by people who either don't understand what they're talking about or who are actively laundering hatred through legitimate-sounding questions. Ask yourself, has the person teaching me about Jewish identity ever sat down with an actual Jewish person who disagrees with them? Have they ever engaged with complexity, or are they just giving me a villain? 5, recognize the pattern. Every form of hatred that has ever operated at scale has followed the same playbook. Dehumanize the group. Make the hatred seem rational. Give it a political justification and let the sorting begin. These Jews over here are fine, but those Jews over there are the problem. The moment you find yourself sorting people within an ethnic group into acceptable and unacceptable categories, you're inside the trap, so step back. And 6, this is the bonus one, specifically for those of you like me who follow Christ, Genesis 12:3 doesn't require you to endorse every action of the modern Israeli government. It doesn't require you to have a fully formed eschatology. It doesn't require you to understand the difference between dispensational premillennialism and amillennialism. It requires you to not curse what God has blessed. And the Jewish people, in all their complexity and all their disagreement and all their beautiful, stubborn insistence on surviving, are part of that story. Your story, our story, all the way back to Abraham. You don't have to understand all of it. You just can't participate in the hatred of it. And right now, a lot of people are participating without knowing it. And that's the trap. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. That's not cliche. It's a documented historical fact. It predates every modern political framework we try to contain it in. It has survived every era, every empire, every ideology. It survived the Babylonians, it survived the Romans, it survived the Inquisition, the pogroms, the Holocaust, and it's surviving this era too, not by showing up in jackboots, but by showing up in the op-eds and campus resolutions and podcast interviews and social media posts that feel righteous until you look at where they lead. The U.S. State Department says we're at levels not seen since 1933. That number should terrify you, not because history is repeating. History doesn't repeat. It rhymes. But because the rhyme scheme is getting awfully familiar. And the trap, the specific trap I've been describing this entire episode, is that the hatred has learned to speak the language of justice. It has learned to dress in the clothes of political critique. It's learned to hide inside legitimate questions so that by the time you realize what you're carrying, it's already in the room. If this episode made you think, if it complicated something you thought was simple, then share it. Not because I need the numbers, but because this conversation needs to get louder than the noise around it. And after you've done that, put the phone down. Go outside, look at the sky, load the dishwasher, play with your kids, fold the laundry. You're a human being, and human beings were not designed to parse hatred all day long, from every direction. I'm Darren. Stay curious, stay honest, stay human. I'll see you next time. Oh, and one other quick thing. I'll talk to you later this week about something new at TrapThink, the Trap Check. I'm going to take you down a Gavin Newsom story and show you exactly what it's doing so that you can see how you are gamed. All right, I'll see you later this week.